All right. I think we can go ahead and get started. And share. All right, can we put up the start of switch to the screen share, and then we will go ahead and get started. All right, perfect. Okay, welcome to our June office hours. We'll go over a little bit of business to start out with, and then we will discuss the topic at hand for June. Quick background on who we are and the purpose of this session. We're Accendero Software. We are a custom software services provider for scientific enterprise, and we are over 10 years old. And we have a very wide portfolio of companies that we assist to really enhance and increase the viability and speed that those various enterprises can conduct complex and challenging scientific questions. And the purpose of our office hours is to bring together the community to take a look at new methods, new topics, and really push forward what's possible and work together. It's far easier to solve problems working together than to solve them working separately. And who I am the CEO and leader of the company. So how does office hours work? The first 5 minutes is exactly what we're doing now, which is just general business. And then the topic of this office hours specifically are skills. And the way that office hours works is we will work together on a problem. I understand that maybe everyone watching does not have full access to all of the software and capabilities that will be demonstrated. That's okay. You have the opportunity to view this later as well, to work through the task. But this is intended to be interactive. It's intended to be live. We work through a problem together, and it's intended to ask questions. And we'll get over how to ask questions in just a moment. And the proposed timing for this exercise is roughly 30 minutes to 45 minutes. We'll see how long it goes and what questions exist. But no longer than we'll be out before 1 o'clock. So things for you to know. The stream is on a 30-second to 1 minute delay. It's not our choice. This is how the technology works. So if you ask questions, we have a moderator who will make sure that I am made aware of what those questions are. But there is that delay between when you ask them and when you see them. It's not ideal, but also feel free to work together with the people who are, also in the session together. The way that those questions are handled is as comments in the event. That is the chatting interface that exists in LinkedIn. I realize it's not ideal, but for the purposes of this session, that's what we will use. Smaller questions we'll handle between ourselves and as part of the session. Larger questions are more than invited. Things that could take 20 minutes, 30 minutes to actually handle. the way that we'll handle those is either we will reach out separately, or we'll have that as a separate session for office hours. All right, so let's get started. I am going to stop sharing that, and then I will move over to sorry, I'm just taking care of one question. All right, let's move over to the application at hand. All right, and if the moderator wants to put that up on screen, perfect. So the purpose of today's office hours is how to use tools like Claude to get work done. Specifically, how to think about organizing and working through a task. This could be a engineering task. This could be a project management task. How do I go about thinking about getting quote unquote work done? And we're going to work through a problem together and see how I do that and how you can do this as well. So the task that we are going to work on today is I want to understand the status of a complex project every day over the course of that project. And I know you're thinking to yourself, we have tools for that. We have things like Jira, we have a whole variety of capabilities, and you are right. The problem is it's very often challenging to get out of those tools exactly what you are looking for, unless you are very, very sophisticated. They're very good at repositories. They often are very challenging to extract the information exactly the way that you want to see it and ask the questions that you want to ask. So we're going to work through today how to do those sorts of things. So let's, for the purpose of this, say you want to do, a daily burn down, right? We want to know the status of the project. So the first, I'm going to walk you through the entire process of doing this. And so you can do this on your own. The first thing we need is data, right? We need what we're actually looking at. And I am not going to assume that I know what your project data looks like. And actually, it doesn't really matter. That's the benefits of something like generative AI. It can kind of figure it out. So the first thing that we're going to ask it to do is we're going to ask it to create some synthetic data for us so that we can work on the problem. And this is important because, as you will see later, we're going to start doing things like building programmatic skills that will use the same type of data over and over again. And so it is important when you are doing this to not start theoretically, but start with the actual data that you are using. So please, we are going burn down. And I have many typos, as I often do when I'm talking to And it is usually pretty good about being okay. Unlike coding in Python, where typos will bring everything down. What shape? Let's do everything. And we'll make some CSV files. And let's make 2 to 3 teams, 6. Oh, yes, absolutely. Let's make it messy. Hold on. I see there's a question. Okay. Oh, we're good. So Claude is working away at the problem. And notice that for this part of the work, we are prompting, we are talking, we are brainstorming, we are thinking aloud with the intelligence system. This is the part of work where I think prompting is useful. And don't worry too much about the form or structure of your prompt, right? There's all of these tutorials on how to prompt the best, right? If that matters, you shouldn't be using a prompt at all. And we'll get to that. For these tasks, be conversational, talk to, that's what these systems are really good at. Ask it questions and review very carefully. And normally when I'm doing this, I'm using one of the more expensive models because it's intended to be a problem solving session where we're working together. And where I want it to spend more time thinking about the questions that I've asked it. Okay, so it's making, oh, good. One of these programs is struggling. I'm gonna bring this over. It's still sharing. Okay, yes, good. Just wanted to make sure that, actually, I might look away. Unfortunately, if it might be, I'm going to be looking at my other screen, so I apologize that I'm not going to be looking directly into the camera while I talk. Okay. Oh, good. There are things that are failed. That's very important. So now we can even take a look at what these. Okay, that's the README, and then these are all of these files. Again, I want to point out these files might not represent exactly how your files are. That's okay. Because this is just synthetic. And when you do this on your project, you will download your actual files and you will set up the system to do it that way. But today we're just learning how to do this. So we need some synthetic data. All right. So now that we have quote unquote our project data, let's go in and say we have project data for I would like to work to design a daily burndown report. I'm worried about projects getting off track. And keeping this pretty vague here, this is where the actual power of this technology lies, because you are not going to be worried about the projects getting off track. You're going to be worried about very specific things. You're going to be worried about, can you pay attention to the junior engineers that they are, meeting, their tasks? Or in this project, we have 29 different work streams. I want to have a very clear report of where we are on all 29 every day. Or you're going to be talking with the system about that very specific project and about your very specific concerns. And this is where the actual power in this technology is. We're not, this is an awful lot of work just to get a very generic burn down. And that's not where the power lies. This is a step where you should have a conversation with the system about your problems. And that's where the power really lies. But we don't have a real project in this, so we can't have that conversation about your specific problems because I don't know what they are. And Claude will ask you some questions, which is helpful. So let's do an HTML dashboard. Scope creeps. I like all of them. We'll take a look at all of them. What scope should each report? Current sprint, all teams. Seems fun. And notice that I'm doing this work in a more collaborative way, in a collaborative interface. I'm not using coding yet. We'll get to the coding. We're still thinking about design. We're thinking about the problems that we have, and we're trying to come up with the best solution to solve our problems. Okay, so here's the Python file that I wrote. And here's the, so let's take a look. Okay, so here's the, and notice how in Claude, the plots aren't rendering, right? And if you want to get these to render, you can open them up in your a separate browser. I've noticed that often the plots, for whatever reason, the interactive plots don't fully render in the co-work interface. I'm not sure why that is. They'll probably fix that at some point. All right, so we have these reports. Now is where this is where the real work begins, because it is very likely that these reports are not exactly what you're looking for, right? I'm trying to see what, do a brief, like these look okay for now. And if this was your project, you would go into those HTMLs, you try them out, you would see where you would now have a conversation with Claude about the pieces of these that are working and the pieces of these that aren't working, and at least how you want it better for now. I also want to point out, this is where the benefit of this system really comes into play. It only took us a few minutes to generate this, right? And now what's going to happen is you're going to put these reports into you're going to actually take them into your work. Tomorrow, you're going to find out that they're missing something very important and that you messed up. And if it's a software that you have bought and specially configured, you're out of luck, because then you'd have to go back and ask people to rebuild it for you, right? It would turn into a big problem. If this is just something that you've put together yourself, and now it's as easy as here is, you can go into right back into this interface tomorrow and say, here's what's not working. How do we change that? And it's as easy as changing it tomorrow. That's great, because and this is the most powerful part of this, is that you do not have to live with anything that you create the first time. You are fully able to change everything about this. All right, so, but there's a problem. Here's why we don't want to go into Claude every single day and ask it to do this. Because one, the burn down report it creates tomorrow is going to be a little bit different, right? That's the problem with generative AI, is it's not deterministic and it's not shareable, right? So let's say you've put in an hour of work with Claude going back and forth, figuring out exactly the way that you want it to be. How do you get it to be exactly that way tomorrow? Well, now we want to take all of this work that we've done, and instead of just leave it here, this is where we package it into a skill, right? We've done the design. Now we switch over into the code interface, and I'm in the same directory. Build me a skill to build. Burn down. Right. And so if you are doing the same thing every day, don't worry about the prompt, right? This is where people, like, anytime you probably are thinking about building a skill, is when you're talking about what is the right prompt. You should never ask the question, what's the right prompt? Because, or at least when you are starting to ask that question, you know that you have already moved away from the land of this should be a prompt to this should be a skill. And now, okay, so when talking about using Claude Code, there's best practices for how to help it handle. I am of the opinion that you should be relatively careful about giving it permission. Right now, it only has permission to operate within the directory, so Claude Code could not, for example, nuke my hard drive. But it's a good idea to pay attention to what it's doing. If you do not feel comfortable using Claude Code and you don't feel comfortable with what it's doing, this is the point to reach out to a friendly engineer and say, could you help me package the work that I have done into a skill? Because at the point where we're thinking about packaging the work, we have moved a little bit from the land of just talking to an AI to actually now we're starting to think about engineering. And there's a couple of things that we'll talk about as the skill progresses. The first thing, and we can talk about this right now, is that skills can be tested, right? Notice how it's building test cases for this skill, which is important, right? Because if you notice that the skill is failing, right, this is where now we can start to think about, and this is for the engineers in the audience, this is no longer just a question of using a project management tool. Now we're getting into engineering. How do we test things so that we can determine that they meet requirements? Not going to really get into that here. Again, if you want to think about the best and most appropriate ways to test all of your skills so that you can ensure that they're meeting all of the needs of the users that will ultimately get them, that's a great conversation to have with an engineer. And if you don't have access to an engineer, that's what we are here to do. So you can reach out to us. And I'm just paying attention to what it's trying to do. And so far, it's doing what it should. And then once it's finished the skill, we'll take a look at it together because it's actually important to review the work that the AI does. And it just popped something up in my browser. It might have popped something up for you. I'm going to get back into yes. Let's have it package the skill. Also notice that you can see on my screen, I'm using Sonnet. I'm using a much cheaper model for the engineering. And that's because we've already done the hard part, right? This is relatively simple. This is just taking the design that actually took some real thoughts and some real thinking and is now doing something far simpler, which is just packaging it and codifying it. So normally when I'm actually doing the skill creation, I'm not using the nearly as expensive models, and it's not a big deal at all because this piece of the work is far more trivial. And you get to save tokens that way. Okay. So let's take a look at that. This is again where you'll want to talk to your friendly engineer about if you're not comfortable and confident actually reading the skill, but it's very important to review the work that any agentic service or coder or anything does before you just sign off on it. Do not assume that it did what you wanted it to do. So let's open the skill. Oh, it's not quite done yet. Once it's done, we'll take a look at the skill. All right. Let's see. I wonder what it's doing. I haven't seen it. Just might stop it and build the burn down. I don't know what it's doing. Take a look. Okay. Well, built the. I don't see the. Make sure it did something weird, which is good, right? Because then we all learn together. Claude code often is working in a separate directory. Okay, it says skill.md file is there too. I want to take a look at the skill.md file. I want us to look at it together. Yep, make sure it copies it over. Awesome. Now it should be there. So let's take a look at the skill together. And see what it did. Because again, might be where you need to, if you are not comfortable, bring in someone who's better and more comfortable at this than you are. Right, I'm going to change which screen I'm sharing for just a moment. And share Visual Studio. All right. So this is the skill.md file is how it actually works. And so, and notice that it's often written in, instead of in programming language, it's written in natural text, though you will notice that the key parts of it are written in scripts, and you should have engineers review those scripts to make sure they're doing what you want. So I already see a very big problem with the skill that was built. And I don't know if you see it, but all files live under this. This works if this is me. But one of the great things about skills is you can share it with someone else. So it built the .skill file, and I can either install that file for the organization to use, or I can share that with other people and they can use it too. But they're certainly not going to have C users A Barber on their computer. And it often does this, right? It will make assumptions, and it's good that we saw this. So this is why it's good if you're not comfortable building skills to talk to a friendly engineer, because you don't want it to be looking at A Barber documents to find critical pieces. You want it to ask where those files are and to already have anything critical packaged. So let's go back into Claude and let's fix it. We have a couple of minutes so we can fix it. This is why never assume everything is fine and that it did just the thing that you wanted it to. Computers never do just the thing that you want them to, whether they have generative intelligence or not. You always have to double check. All right, so we're going to stop sharing this. And we're going to go back into Claude, and we're going to tell it to do something a little bit different. And we didn't make a mistake. That's just the way the process works. Never assume that everything is just the way you want it the first time around. So the skill should not depend on any folder or any specific input data. The user should specify that at runtime. Right, and then it will tell me that I have a good point. So I'll move hard-coded paths. Perfect. Thank you, Claude. All right, and I'm going to quickly, I might not, actually, I think I will. Let's see, stop sharing for just a moment and we'll bring it back up. Share. All right, so how does the skill work? Well, now it's looking for a directory and it's trying to find burned down data in that directory, and it will create a burned down report.html. For the purposes of this exercise, that's fine. That seems great. But that's important to know. And maybe you want it to work that way, and maybe you don't. So these are when you're going to have to start making those decisions. How should this skill work? What does the data look like? Is it going to look like this every day? And you want to get this into a process, right? And you will notice that if you actually go into the code that is packaged with the skill, it's probably assuming a very specific format of the data. And you'll need to update things if that changes. All right, so how do you actually install a skill and use it in Claude? That's the last piece that we'll get to, and then we'll work on questions. All right, so now share. So in order to install skills, you go into the customize menu, and part of that is skills. And there are things in my skills that I proprietary or things that are under development that I don't particularly want to record. So I am going to install this skill, and then, and if you have trouble installing, please reach out, but it's relatively straightforward to install a skill. You just go in there and under create skill, you can upload, or depending on what sort of permissions you have, you might only be allowed access to your organization skills. Sound clear? I'm just going to install this, and then I can get back in and I can show you how to use a skill. Internal server error. Okay, worked that time. Weird. So I'm going to reshare my screen. And what you can see is if you do this /, this brings up a list of skills, and you can see all of the various skills that you want to use. And then specifically, you can also say things, right? You know, the whole system has a way that you can say, please run me a burn down report. And then it will, quote unquote, intuit which skill to use. I usually have, 2 dozen skills installed at any given time. I don't particularly usually want the system to be trying to figure out what I want to do when I know exactly what I wanted to do. So I very rarely use a more generic way to talk to it. I tell it what I want because I'm an engineer, and then I'll say run the burn down report for today, or whatever. And I'm not gonna belabor the point. But okay, so we've gone through the whole process. We've gone through ideating what you would want to be a skill, building a skill, reviewing the skill, installing the skill, and then running the skill. Are there any questions? Okay, No questions as of now. We will leave it for a moment for people if there are questions. And if not, then we will end office hours for June. I'm just waiting for the moderator to tell me that we are all clear and that there are no questions. Okay, no questions. If questions come up later, please feel to reach out to me. I don't know how many of you had the ability to actually be working along with this. As you work along with this project and try to make it all work, if things come up and you need additional assistance, reach out. It was wonderful to see you today for our June office hours, and we will see you next time. Thank you.